Hi everyone, thank you for joining us. I'm really excited today to be hosting on behalf of Indian Women Cinematographers Collective a very special guest, someone we all look up to, cinematographer, director Reed Morano.
Hi, Reed.
Hi, how are
Thank,
you?
I'm good. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you
I
for
was just
having me.
I was just filling in everyone about the story of how I reached out to you a few months back, and you were busy with the ongoing edit, and but you gave us your word that you will be a part of it, and you've kept it, and and thanks to Gina for making it possible.
Gina's awesome.
Figuring figuring it out with you and bringing us to you here. And I was just mentioning that how so many of us who are here look up to you, Reed, in so many regards, which brings me to the first question: that what is it that inspired Reed to join filmmaking? Who were your inspirations?
Well, I mean, I would have to probably say my dad actually was the person who got me into it because he got me into movies. So he
Right.
really like pushed me kind of to he gave me a video camera when there was like the once the consumer, video cameras came out. He brought back one. He went to Asia for work and he came back with a video camera and he was like, "Will you document the family?" And I just like to write, and I was very introverted, and I didn't really have any interest in because you have to be kind of brave. You have to be very brave in a way to be a cinematographer. In some aspects, I feel like you're brave, and in other aspects, sometimes I feel like I hide behind the camera. But he was the one who kind of pushed me to pick up the camera and involve myself. And the movies that he shared with me when I was young, which were, you know, ranging from everything from, Splash and, those kind of funny 80s movies to My Life as a Dog, which is like so weird Swedish European film about these young kids that I remember, you know, when I didn't know the difference between what was just a mainstream film and a foreign film, and I just liked being. It was sort of where I started when I was young, where I would watch movies and I would feel like I was in the story, you know.
Right.
When you leave a theater, you leave when you're watching a movie, and you kind of come out of it, and you almost feel like you're one of the characters. I don't know if that how I know that happens probably to some other people, but really to me, I always felt like, oh, now I feel like I'm in that world, and I never really thought about it being a job because I didn't have any examples in my life of people who were, cinematographers who are women or anything until when I was my last year of high school. My dad, who was working he always was starting new businesses and stuff. He started, I actually have never really told this part of my story, so this is interesting, I think, in a way, is that he always was dabbling in new things. He was kind of like an idea guy, he really wanted to always he was always coming up with a new scheme, basically. And this was the year when the very first Real World came out. I don't know if you remember, but the Real World came out on MTV, and it was no reality. There were no reality shows or anything ever until that one. And after he saw that, it still hadn't really caught on yet. But he wanted to make a series. He wanted to make a show that was like a docu series that was called Young, Single, and on the Road, and it would be 5 camera crews send 5 college students out across the world to different countries to go and try to live in that country with just a small amount of money and nothing else. Just figure out, you're dropped in this foreign country, you don't know the language, figure out how to live and make a living there. And we made a pilot for it the summer before I went to college, and I was just in it. I'm not, I didn't know really enough to be the person that would shoot it, but there was this amazing woman who my dad hired who was our camera woman. One of the other, there was also a male cameraman, but we won't talk about him. But Nicole McKinley Hahn, who actually you should meet her and interview her. She's an amazing documentarian, and basically like a family member to me. She was carrying the camera and she was filming all of us, and I didn't really think consciously at the time, oh, that's weird, a woman's filming us. I just didn't even think that's weird to me. And then I didn't realize until once I went to apply to college. I was almost going to go to Boston University for journalism because I still thought I was going to write, and I was really into photography at that time and everything, and I guess I didn't realize that was sort of, I just thought, okay, if I go for journalism, that's a real job, And I didn't really realize that there was an alternative until my dad said, why don't you apply to film school? And he's like, because you love taking pictures and you love telling stories. So, it just seems like a logical combination of things. So I was like, yeah, that sounds like a lot more fun than school for journalism. Right. But no, I mean, I love journalism, but I was like, I think it was much more the right call. He made the right call. And then I applied to NYU undergrad and I got in, luckily, somehow, magically.
Right. I mean, you did do photography and you did shoot certain things beforehand, as in, with the camera that your dad gave you and everything. And probably you had that inclination already. And, yeah, maybe. I mean, I don't know. Listening to you, it just it seemed a little. I don't know whether it was unusual for you to get that suggestion from your dad. I mean, how usual it is for girls to get those kind of suggestions. Did that thought ever occur to you?
No, I mean, my dad was an unusual guy. I wasn't surprised but I did realize later that he was sort of a unicorn amongst parents in a way, because most young people want to go to film school, or they want to make movies, and their parents are like not supportive of it at all. So I realized how so lucky I was. Not only did my dad make that suggestion, but my mother never once debated it or was worried. And, my dad, my first year of film school, my dad passed away, actually, even though he sort of had all these big, lofty goals of us to make movies together. So, but my mom continued, even though I couldn't really, once he passed away, I wasn't really able to afford to go to film school. So my mom really, and the rest of my family kind of all pitched in and kind of helped me get the financial aid and helped me make payments and try to do it. And I ended up getting a scholarship, and yeah, it was very, through a lot of help from my dad's friends and things like that. But my mom kept supporting me and you never once wavered, and she was never like, okay, stop doing what you're doing. This is ridiculous. And I mean, it goes on for a long time, and for some people it takes years and years before they can make a living. In my case, I think I wasn't really getting paid a real livable wage as a cinematographer till I graduated 2000. And then I was supposed to graduate in 99, but I had to take a year off because of the financial aid problem. But I did stay involved in the film school. I was a teacher's assistant. I offered to shoot people's films. I did whatever I could to stay a part of it. So I think in a way I kind of won by getting an extra year working with all the filmmakers at NYU, but my but anyway, yeah. So when I got out, I think 2000. It wasn't until 2006 or so when I got my first really steady job as a cinematographer. So that was 6 years, and you just have to. Right. I think that's what we all do. We're all dreamers, and we just try to stick with it,
Right. I mean, and your film that you're talking about that you got after 6 years is Frozen River. That's the film that you're talking about, right?
Well, actually, that one was not paying a livable wage, to be honest. That one was paying. It definitely paid me, and it was the job that totally changed my career for the better. But I was actually talking about I just got a job shooting a reality show because I wanted to shoot the movies like Frozen River, but I also I had to find a way to make a living so I could afford to shoot a movie like Frozen River, because the wage that they paid us was, you know, below minimum wage for everybody on the crew was paid the same amount. So it was a very like all favored nations kind of, the DP made the same as the PA, the, you know, whatever. I mean, so it was a labor of love, but like, I'm so glad I didn't bat an eyelash at the money. I always just felt bad for my crew that they had to make that amount of money at work, and that we had very freezing cold shooting conditions. So it was, that part was not my favorite. But yeah, it was good. That was the first real like things when things started to pick up and get momentum. I was happy to be there. Despite all of those things, it was like the first time I was shooting something that I felt the story was the kind of story I wanted to be telling. And for that, I'm very grateful to Courtney, the director, for writing that amazing story. And also just for Melissa Leo and Misty Upham, who were the stars in the movie, who gave me my first really real, you know, feature film experience with amazing performances. And I was so grateful for that. I know in my heart I was probably like her third or fourth or fifth choice for DP, whatever reason, probably because they had no money. And I'm glad that's the part I realized that bothered me for a moment, but then I realized it doesn't matter. I got here, I got my foot in the door. And even if I was the third or the second or the fifth choice, I'm going to just take this opportunity and make everyone realize I was the only choice, you know? So that's what you just got to do.
Yeah, I mean, this is what I also had thought of asking you, that, you know, when we start out our journey as in filmmaking, or when we go to film school, we have all these ideas that, you know, we'll tell these kind of stories, we'll tell those stories in this manner. And then, you know, over a period of time, there could be reasons that, you know, we may get, you know, drifted away from that for various reasons. How does one, you know, still remain at it and not lose that sight and get it done?
You know, I think in this time period, it may be a little more difficult because of the exposure that we have to people in our field. It's both a blessing and a curse, because I think that sometimes platforms like this, Instagram, it's so great to be connected to you and to the collective that you have, and all the other amazing work that's out there. And all these things are blessings, I think, you know, but they sometimes, I think, they make people who are coming up right now sometimes be a little too hard on themselves, because they're sort of comparing them. So there's a lot of basis for comparison of, you can see people, what they're shooting all around you, and you don't know, you know, if that person just came onto the scene, or you might have been working at it for 12 years, and then this other person shooting, and now they're shooting a feature, and they just, like, you know, you look and they graduated college a couple years ago or something, you know, which does happen, by the way. There were some frustrating moments when I came out of NYU where, you know, my friends and I didn't do anything for a long time, but we saw there was some guy, you know, some kids who came out, and like 3 years later, they came out after us, but, you know, then they're making like Spider-Man or some kind of crazy thing, and you're like, like, white dude, you know, like, whatever. But I think what I'm trying to say is now, though, I think there's a lot more. I find also the young people that are coming up, because I always try to have, and I notice they get they're hard on themselves because they feel like they need to be at a higher level in their career already. And I think that part of that is seeing a lot of the people around them the amount of work they're doing. So at the same time, while it feels as though young people have more access to equipment in order to make more stories, so therefore more opportunity, logically there would be more opportunity, I think at the same time there's also more visibility to other people's work. And I know one of the things that I felt a lot about when I was in cinematography solely, before I moved to directing, was you can't help but compare yourself. You can't help but like watch other people's work and be envious. And sometimes that envy, you need to just turn it. I would try to not let it like make me feel bad about myself, but rather let it inspire me to not try to be or do what someone else was doing, but to push towards whatever it is that is my specialty or my calling, and maybe what makes me unique. And at the time when I was coming up, I thought that, you know, there weren't many female cinematographers, and the ones that I looked up to were the people who are still there with me now, and I can luckily call colleagues in the ASC like Amy Vincent and Ellen Curris and Nancy Schreiber, you know, all of the women who they sort of set the example for me and my generation. And, you know, I think now it's a little more difficult. So people, it's harder to kind of feel like, I think at the time when I was going through it, it was easier for me in a way, because there wasn't it wasn't like, I was so naive. I didn't really realize for a long time that I was going to have a hard road because I was a woman, because I just still didn't understand. I wasn't in the film world, really in it, until like probably 10 years after I graduated, really, technically. And I didn't really realize how hard it was for a woman to do the job I was trying to do. In fact, prior to that, because, you know, as we know, it's not possible always to only become, you can't just be like, I'm a DP and start out DPing. And you can, but it always, I found from my path, it was better for me to do all the jobs on the way up. So I PA'd, and then I AC loaded film, and I was trained by a very militant French cinematographer in college who used to use a stopwatch to time to see how fast I could load mags in the bag. You know, that kind of thing. And then I learned to pull focus only with, you know, pulling with the whip right off the barrel, and just measuring and going by sight, no monitors. This is obviously a long time ago. So I learned to do that stuff. And then I also, once I got out of college, you know, I started to try to get to work on indie films, and you know, I knew I couldn't just go on and become someone's DP. I was still shooting things for free for friends through word of mouth. But then I was like, oh, I want to understand lighting. I realized at film school, they teach us sort of what we need to know in that moment in time. And they empower you to experiment, but they don't give you like so much information you're overwhelmed. And I think that at the time I was like, why didn't they tell me about, you know, all this stuff, like all the ways you could shape light, you know, and how so much of cinematography is actually gripping. At least in America, right. In the American system, you know, whoever it is that's cutting the light and shaping the light, which is probably, you know, we're over by you guys, I assume is probably like the European system where the gaffer helps to do that.
Yeah.
But,
right.
Yeah. So for me, I'm in the American system. I ended up working on a lot of shoots for friends. In order to also study other cinematographers, I worked as their key grip, and, you know, just like on short films and stuff, and I would pack the truck, and I knew all the gear, and I started to try to understand what it meant, what I had to do to the light. It's so much more than just putting the light there. It's what you do to it. It's what you take away. It's what you put in front of it. It's what it's hitting. And then what it's reflecting off of, and all those things. And so I did that for a while, still not fully understanding and grasping lighting. But it was baby steps. I wasn't meticulous. I always wondered and second guessed myself, like, because I was not a super technical person. I didn't go to film school to become a cinematographer. I went to film school because I thought I would probably be a writer or a director. But then I realized I actually watched, on the very first shoot I was on, and I saw what the DP was doing, and I'm like, that is the best job on set. I just was drawn to it. I just wanted to be the person who got to see it first,
Right.
And really, I didn't realize at that time, I think probably the very good directors, they see it first. They really see it. But at that level in film school, I think the cinematographer has a great deal of control. And they are, especially if you're shooting on film, and no one, when I was at film school, we weren't shooting digital really. There wasn't any HD yet. And so when I was there, I was only shooting like 16 millimeter, 35 millimeter. So it was like you just had a little monitor, and that crappy monitor where nobody could see what the hell was happening. And you were kind of magical because you were a cinematographer making this magical image, and no one really knew what it was going to look like in the end. And
Right.
in many ways, that was a much scarier beginning into cinematography. But then the ironic part was I refused to shoot like video, and while I was at college, because I had done a documentary on the on Betacam or something, and I used that as a way to get out of my video classes. So when I graduated NYU, I hadn't done any video classes. So when I got out, my very first feature I did get asked to shoot from a good friend of mine, Eric Jahola, who is a wonderful director, who was the only person who ever really believed in me initially. He asked me to shoot his first feature, which happened to be on the Sony, the very first generation of the Cine Alta, the first HD that they made.
Right.
And I had no idea. And I was just like, okay, all I wanted to do was shoot a feature. So I was like, okay, yeah, I'll do it. And it was one of the hardest jobs ever because to try to make it look good. I mean, I was spoiled. We were shooting film, and film is just like, you don't actually I hate to say it, dirty little secret, but you don't have to be that great at lighting to make film look good. And I wasn't good then. And you have to be, I think there's something interesting about, particularly with the first generation of the HD cameras, you had to be really good at lighting to try to make that look like anything worth looking at. And so no one will ever see that film. But it was good because I got, it enabled me to get my teachers at NYU who, I had graduated. They asked me to come back and be an adjunct professor for some advanced television classes they had that they were going to use HD cameras in. And since they didn't, they were like, oh, you just shot this film on HD, so you now know the camera. And I was like, I wouldn't have me teach your students for the amount of money they're paying for tuition. But I was like, but I need a job, so I'm going to do it anyway.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, those were the cameras on which we had our digital classes, back in film school. At least when I was in film school, those were the cameras that we had our digital classes on. And so somebody here had asked a question long ago. What was that point when you felt confident when you started feeling confident as a cinematographer?
When did I start feeling confident as a cinematographer? I would say, I honestly, maybe by the time I was joining the union, I felt confident. Every time I would go to shoot a new film, I felt excited. I felt very scared. And I did get to shoot a lot of film while I was starting out. I shot a couple features that went to Sundance after Frozen River that actually ended up being on film, which was kind of a miracle. I did a movie with a wonderful, amazing director, So Young Kim. who, it was a movie called For Ellen with Paul
Right.
Dano and Jenna Malone and Dakota Johnson was in it, but and Margarita Laviva. Great film. So Young Kim's movies are amazing. For me, she was sort of, it was a really big goal for me to work with somebody with her taste and aesthetic, and I really grateful I got to do that. So yeah, I did get to shoot a very, I mean, I basically had a gaffer and a key grip. I pretty much had one guy that came and helped me. It's an old friend of my family's, this guy, Adam Lukens, and he came, normally my husband, Matt, my husband at the time, he would have come and gaffed the movie for me, but he had to go. We were DPing a reality show at that time, like co-DPing, and he had to go to LA to make the actual money for the family, and he went and DP'd that show so I could do this movie. And then I was probably 4 months pregnant at that time with my second son. So I went with the baby, my older son, and then 4 months pregnant to go shoot this movie. And I think that when I got that job, I still didn't feel like I really knew what I was doing, but I was confident enough to take that job. And I think it ended up I felt like I did a lot of experimental stuff on that shoot because out of necessity, because we didn't have a lot of equipment. For example, there's one scene in it where we had to have wanted a fly to crawl into Paul Dano's ear when he was sleeping in a scene at night in his hotel room. And we didn't have budget for VFX or any of that. That would have obviously been the easiest way to do it. And so we did it the good old-fashioned way. I also didn't have close-up filters. I hadn't checked out or anything. And we were up in the middle of upstate New York in the winter with no, access to equipment. And basically what I ended up doing was my crew, I sent them to the hardware store. They got me a magnifying glass. I taped a magnifying glass to the front of the lens. And we put up, this was all sort of a concoction I made up of how we could do this. It was not a time-saving way. But we put up a mosquito net around the bed and put, Paul in the bed. And I went under the mosquito net with the camera. And we collected some flies and we put the fly into the mosquito netting, put honey on his ear. And I was just sitting there holding the camera like a baby and looking, looking through the eyepiece like this. And when we saw that the fly was crawling close enough to his ear, I actually had to, in order to get it in focus, I had to physically move forward with the camera. So I was in the moment trying to get focused by my position, not any other way. And that's how we got that shot. But, it's just having the confidence to do those things while you were running 35 millimeter film on a very low budget movie. We did it and those things came out cool. There was a lot of cool stuff we did. And I think I started to feel more confident around then. And then right after that, I went and shot this other movie, Little Birds, which we shot on 2perf, 35 millimeter out on the West Coast, in the desert. And then I was 7 or 8 months pregnant and we did that and just had a great time. And then those films ended up getting into Sundance, and that was a really, that's when I started to feel okay, maybe it's not a fluke. Maybe I actually could be good at this, maybe I could do this for a living.
Right. So. I mean, you became quite a regular at Sundance. I mean, a lot of your films have gone to Sundance and done, quite well and have been received quite well. And while listening to you, I was also thinking that, do you miss any of those moments now that you have all the big gear and everything to your disposal? Do you miss those moments of being, figuring out things, doing them in those manner?
Yeah, being inventive in the moment. Yeah, I do miss those. But what I found is actually you still get those opportunities, even on bigger shoots, because sometimes you come up with ideas in the moment that you didn't have before, and you kind of have to just sort of think on the fly. You have to make it happen. And
Right.
and I also just the spirit of making a small film with very little gear. I have that spirit in me. The whole time I've been quarantined here at my house, you know, my kids are here, and Matt is here, their dad, and we have some lights, and we might, you know, we have some cameras, and we were always planning. We had so much work, we haven't been able to do it yet, but, you know, to make a little movie here, because we can make it out of sheets and the couple lights that we have and whatever camera. Like, we could pull something together. And I think, like, the more you know, the more experience you get, the more fun it is to kind of go back to basics. And, you know, even a movie I did a couple years ago called I Think We're Alone Now, where I DP'd it and directed it. We challenged ourselves. I challenged myself to try to light at night with only the lights that the character would have access to in the apocalypse, with no electricity. So all battery operated lamps and flashlights and solar powered lanterns and things like that, and headlamps and things. So we did do that. We used real film lights in that movie, but we actually used them mainly during the day. We used them mostly in the day to push sunlight, consistent sunlight through windows. But then we used we got art department, my amazing production designer. If you ever get a chance to work with her, Kelly McGeehee is a genius, and she got me like her and her team got every kind of possible awesome, cool lantern that could potentially work in the apocalypse, and we just used those and, you know, get creative. And a lot of times it would be like he would have a jug of water, because we also had to figure out how he drank water. So he had a jug of water set somewhere, and then he'd put his flashlight down, and it just randomly would be pointing at the jug of water, which then would create like a large lantern. And those kind of things, it's like, obviously I could have lit it with real lights. We had enough money to do that, but I wanted to do it that way because I wanted it to feel real to that story, but also because I just like the challenge. You know, one of the scenes, there's a scene where he goes into his kitchen, and the Peter Dinklage character, and Elle Fanning, right, is asleep on the couch. She fell asleep. So he brings her a glass of water, and her headlamp is sitting on the table next to her, but there's a crumpled up napkin, and her headlamp is bouncing into the napkin back onto her face. So it's not pointing at her, it's like flaring the lens, but it's also bouncing back onto her. And that was like a thing I probably wasted, honestly, like an hour just doing those little things. But it made me really happy, because that's the kind of experimentation that we start out doing, right, you know?
Well, I mean that's, I think, something which I end up noticing in your visual style is, you know, that you do end up playing with a lot of darkness, and you know, you sort of use it in a very poetic would be the right word to say, I think, because I mean, and it's kind of, it feels like a signature of yours now. And also the other things that are very distinct, or most of the times, when you operate the camera, you know, when you're doing the handheld shots and everything, and even on movies which you're directing, which brings me to a lot of, I mean, I'm getting asked this question a lot of times, that to ask you, how do you manage both the roles? And I wouldn't say that it's two roles now. You direct, you know, you're the cinematographer, and you operate the camera. So how do you manage that?
Well, I would say you can only manage it if you have an amazing crew that supports you and believes in you. Because I wouldn't be able to do it without the help of like everyone doing what they need to do to enable that to happen. like my AD, my producers, and the actors, but also the crew, like my gaffer, my key grip, and my camera department. They're getting less of me because I'm doing both jobs, but I'm still right there. But I still have to be now, I have to be most available to the actors. So
right.
I meant a lot of that preparation happens prior to being on set. So I do a much more intense prep with my gaffer and my key grip in terms of when we scout, we really, really meticulously decide how we're going to do it, what lights where, all the things, and then just try to stick to that on the day. Obviously, as we all know, a lot of that stuff is made up on the day. Despite the best of intentions to follow your lighting plan, your diagrams, you may do it, but then nature throws you a loop, you know, or throws you for a loop and throws a curveball, and you have to go with it. But luckily, if you have a great gaffer and key grip who you trust and who work well together, I think that really helps. And you know, the guys on that shoot were super helpful to me. You know, rolling with, sometimes we had to do crazy stuff in the moment. I mean, we ran out of, I wanted to shoot a lot of that movie at Magic Hour because the main location was a place with a lot of windows. And, you know, part of me trying to do both jobs was also thinking about what is the way I can make this look really good, but spend the least amount of time lighting it and fidgeting over it so I can get to the story. But I still want it to look spectacular, you know? So I was able to do some things that I can't normally do as someone else's DP, which was take more risks. So, because the only person who's getting screwed if the risk doesn't work out is really me, you know? So, for example, I didn't want to sit there trying to do, because we were shooting at a big, huge wall of windows out of this library looking out to the Hudson River. There was no way that on our budget, which was very small, it was like a $3 million movie, we couldn't afford to put out a lighting balloon for that many days and light up the river. And also, it's the apocalypse. So there was no way to justify lights there and everything. You know, it would have to be moonlight, and it was a bit of a stretch. So I decided that in the apocalypse, most of the stuff that the character of Del would do would happen. He would eat his dinner at Magic Hour, and there's still a bit of light out because he would enjoy the view. And so we positioned, you know, we made it so that most of the scenes that happened in the evening happened at Magic Hour, and then they kind of, you know, there was a few scenes that happened at night that we really embraced. But the Magic Hour ones were tricky, and what we ended up having to do was I had a camera operator who I really trust, this person, Mike Heathcote, who worked with me on when I did the first season of The Handmaid's Tale. He was my Steadicam operator on that. And he came and was my Steadicam on I Think We're Alone Now, and he was also my other operator. And he and I shot those, there were scenes between Elle Fanning and Peter Dinklage at a table or wherever they were in the room. But we would two camera all the time, even though I needed to see both cameras. So I would be handheld shooting Peter with my right eye, and keep my left eye open, and my ACs would keep a 7-inch monitor in front of my face so I could see Mike's camera shooting Elle. So I was watching her performance, and I was like, you know, watching his and hers at the same time. So we were just doing it like that. No going back for playback, none of that. And then I was able to direct them both that way. And there was some weird tricks to it in terms of being indie. But really what it came down to was your cast has to be on board for you to do that and understand that there are benefits to it, like intimacy and it probably does save time. I love the process of working with a cinematographer, so I'm never going to not like that option. But there are moments when it's fun for me to just go back to doing it. And probably, honestly, it's not that I think I'm better at it. I just miss that part of the craft. But I also love, you know, I'm passionate about that still. And when I did it, it helped. There was other benefits. It was the time saving thing. You know, I don't have to tell a DP. I would never, and I never have ever told one of my DPs to hurry up. I've never told them how to do their lighting. I don't want to step on my DP's toes. When I have a DP, I want to treat the DP the way I wish to be treated as a DP, and wasn't always treated that way. And so,
right.
you know, the DPs I work with always want to work together again, because I think they realize, even though there's some annoying things about me, you know, like I like to pick up the camera and operate sometimes. Other than that, it's pretty much fun for them, because I'm just like, take all the risks you want, do crazy stuff. I'm not going to bug you about it, you know. I rarely say anything. If anything, I say maybe it doesn't have to be that. You can go darker if you want, you know. But
right.
yeah, I mean, it's hard, but it's a balance, you know.
But when you are directing, and I mean, being a DP, you also know that, you know, so I mean, when you're directing, I'm sure that, you know, you have certain things that you want to get done with on a particular day, and being a DP, you know that how you know, how much time goes into doing what. And sometimes maybe it could also be you know, working in the other way, that it may be taking a little bit more time, or I don't know, like have you ever had that thought in your head that, you know, maybe I need to, how do you resist interfering at that moment when you feel
As
that
a DP?
you can, as a director, when you're watching your DP, as in, you know,
Yeah.
and when you know, you don't want to interfere, but at the same time, you know, directors, as you know, they always have their own you know, set of things in their head that they want to get done.
Yeah.
How do you manage those times?
Well, I mean, I'd be very clear. You know, I try to be very clear with my DPs that I've worked with about what my goals are, what I want to get, so that they also know when things are taking long, they're aware it's taking a long time. And I mean, we've all been there. I've had my
Right.
fair share of lighting setups that I was doing for directors, and I know everyone was waiting on me. You know, I've been there. The interesting thing that's happened since I started DPing for myself is I became a much faster DP, probably because I wasn't fulfilling anyone else's expectations except for my own. So when you're a DP and you're DPing for someone else, unfortunately, you have to read people's minds. And sometimes I think we overcompensate as cinematographers, and we do more than maybe we would do if we were just doing it for ourselves. We do more because, you know, that's our job. That's our whole job.
Right.
And it is a whole job. And when, you know, I have a DP, I've been so lucky to work with such amazing DPs who are like idols to me. You know, it's sort of, there's definitely been moments where I look over and I'm like, I could have done that so much more quickly. I don't know why he's going through all that trouble, but it ends up looking lovely. And I bite my tongue, because so much of being, I think, a good filmmaker in general, whether it's a cinematographer or a director, is knowing how to empower the people that you're working with. So if you're a DP, it's empowering your gaffer and your key grip. You know, you don't want them, you have to say, you know, you want your crew to be fast and efficient. But
Right.
I always found the way to get the best out of my crews was not to abuse them, but not to undermine them, but to empower them and hopefully get them to, and you know, everybody has bad moments, but I was particularly tried to be sensitive to that. And I think, you know, when I have DPs now, I'm more afraid of pissing them off, to be honest, because they're, you know, I mean, DPs can be grumpy, well, at least the male DPs that I work with, but I wouldn't that wouldn't stop me from making a comment, you know? I mean, I remember on the last movie I did, I was working with Sean Bobbitt, who, I adore, and he's an amazing cinematographer. And I was so pleased that he wanted to do the movie. There was such a small, unfortunately, group of cinematographers that studio would approve. And he was in that group, and luckily he wanted to do it. And he you know, I mean, he did his thing. I let him do his thing. I liked what he did, and it was different than what I would do. But I decided to embrace it. The only things I ever told him on the shoot was like, you know, don't feel like you need to make it so bright. You can go darker, you know. But I think he was figuring,
Right.
you know, figuring me out, and also felt a duty because we were doing a big studio movie. He felt maybe this duty to make it look more polished or something. But you know, then he kind of reverted to his natural instincts, I think, which were not really anything to do with me, which was great. But there was only one time, I think, where he had two lights, huge lights on cranes, and it was during a day scene in a glass house, and they were both coming through. And I just sort of whispered to him, but we had already worked together for a long time at this point, because that movie went on for quite some time. And I just whispered to him, not in front of anyone else, because so much of this is about respect, respecting your
Right.
DP's position. He is the head of the crew, and I'm never going to undermine him in front of his crew. And, you know, because there's no need. I don't need to prove anything to anyone. So I just whispered to him and I said, I don't think you really need that other light. And he was like, are you sure though? I feel like it's going to be totally dark. And I'm like, no, it's going to be fine. I know it. Just trust me. And he took it, he didn't turn it on. And then we did the scene, and afterward he came up to me and he said, and he's an older man, you know, he's been doing this for a lot longer than me. He came up to me and was like, thank you for telling me that.
Right.
It looked a lot better. And, you know, I think that when you respect your crew, even if they think they know more than you know, if you treat them with respect, I think oftentimes you get the best back from them, and you get that they are willing to do the things that you occasionally ask for, you know?
At the same time, I just wanted to ask you, when you were mentioning, you know, early on, about when you were in film school and, you know, you weren't really ready about the challenges that were coming your way, and you didn't think that as a female, it may be any different. But do you remember any of the things that, you know, might have pulled you down, but at the same time made you resolve that you're going to do it? Do you remember anything from the past like that?
Yeah, I mean, there were moments where people doubted. I mean, I knew there were many jobs I didn't get because I was a woman, and I knew I started to notice there was mostly guys, and sometimes you feel like they're more competent in their craft and more technical and physically, you know, maybe more able. I mean, I kind of ignored the physicality bit. I did think in college, I was worried, oh, do I need to like work out? Do I need to like lift weights to be able to do the camera? Because I really loved handheld. You don't have to do handheld to be a DP, you know, but I do think it helps to have an instinct for that, because it would be nice for you to be able to you know, share with your operators, or you know, if the director is seeking a certain emotionality, it would be nice that, you know, someone on set can pick up the camera and give it to them. But at the same time, there's so many aspects of cinematography, and a lot of them are traditionally masculine roles. So it's hard to ignore the fact that people look at you and they think, oh, that little thing is going to carry the camera. You know, like I'm not that big of I'm not that big of a person. Hopefully I do better with a real camera than I do with my iPhone camera, to be honest. This is like but
you've done a wonderful shoot also with the iPhone camera. For yeah, I mean, that's another thing.
You mean on the when I was I did a music video for Olivia Wilde. Yeah, that was fun. That was like also embarrassing for me, because I was like, why? I would never shoot on an iPhone. I used to not shoot on video, and it was a really interesting challenge.
Right. Okay. Sorry to kind of digress from what you were saying, but yeah. So.
No, I think it's okay. I mean, basically, there were times when people would say things to me like, I told a story recently about how I was on a shoot in film school, and one of the young guys on the set basically said, I was building a car mount, a hood mount for the camera to do this shot of this driving shot. And, you know, on film school, it's like all hands on deck. We didn't really have a grip, so I was kind of building it myself as the DP. And some production assistant started making snapping some comments about, are you sure the camera's going to stay on there and all this stuff? I mean, I'm sure it looked like a disaster, but with all the ratchet straps and whatnot. But I knew it was sturdy, and I knew I had done this before, and I knew it was going to be fine. I wouldn't have put the camera on there if I didn't think it was going to stay on, because that's like everyone's worst nightmare, is something happening to the camera. So
Right.
I was confident in it, and I was confident that I knew how to do it. And so I said to the guy, you know, if you are worried about it, why don't you, and I just started unbuckling all the ratchet straps, and I was like, if you're worried about it, why don't you put it on instead? And I took it all apart and then put it on the ground next to the car, and I said, why don't you do it? And we waited there for, I mean, obviously this is a student film, so with not a lot of rules or time constraints, so I was able to do that. But I proved my
Right.
point. He was like, oh, yeah. Then he kind of stuttered and was like, no, actually, he didn't know how to do it. So then I put it back on again, quicker the second time, I guess. And it was fine, of course. But you can't just do that when somebody doubts your ability. I think the best thing you can do when you feel like you're suffering some kind of prejudice is, if you have the opportunity, is just unfortunately, as women, I think we have to work like at least 10 times harder for someone to accept that we can do the same thing. So we can't just work at the same level as our counterparts, our male counterparts. And I do think even in this time, where there's a lot more female cinematographers, there is still the disparity of, there's still an element of prove yourself. Even now, for example, after I've shot, I mean, I remember when I was coming up, before I got into the union in, Local 600 in America, I was up to DP a $5 million feature, which was a lot of money to me at that time. I'd never DP'd anything that large, and I wasn't in the union yet, and I really wanted this job. And I met with the director and the writer, who were a couple, and I adored them, and I think they adored me, and we all got along famously. We're all in the same age range. I think they were maybe a little younger than me. But there was a producer in the room who happened to be an older woman. And interestingly, even though all of my great producers, so many of my great producers I've worked with have been women who have supported me. This particular producer I didn't know actually was the reason I didn't get hired. The director and the writer wanted me to DP the film. And she told my agent that I was not mature. She felt I wasn't mature enough to DP because I looked young, you know. I think sometimes if you're a woman and you're diminutive and you look young for your age, it's like a million strikes against you. So I found myself coming up being like, I can't wait till I have grayer hair so people can respect me for once, you know. Once I get a few gray hairs, and some wrinkles, people are really going to listen.
But then there'd be the other challenge that then you'd be, old and frail, and you'd be old and frail, and so then that would be the doubt that, can you really handle it?
Yes. It's like you can't win, really. But what was interesting was I found that I didn't get that job, and I was really bummed. But a couple days later, I got an interview for another $5 million feature. And this one was being directed by Rob Reiner, who directed The Princess Bride, Stand By Me, so many classics, Spinal Tap. This is Spinal Tap. He is a person whose movies I grew up on, and I was like, wow, I can't believe I have an interview with Rob Reiner. So I met with him and his producer, Alan Greisman, and they're old men, old Hollywood white men. My
Right.
interview was 27 minutes. I made a huge lookbook. I took a few risks. I put in some really dark naturalistic stuff, which I knew was not his style. I told why. They had never shot Varicam, not Varicam, oh, maybe it was Varicam. It was around that time again when HD was still new. They had never shot on the Panasonic Varicam. He'd only shot film at that point, and they knew I shot digital and knew what I was doing at that point, finally. And I got out of that meeting. It was less than 30 minutes. It was a great meeting, I felt, but also I realized it was really short. But I guess when you're someone like that, you're just confident. You know what you want right away when you see it. And, you know, he loved that lookbook and my confidence about shooting digital. I was just confident. I was like, I think, we can make it look as much like film as possible. And about 15 minutes after that meeting, I got a phone call from my agent telling me that they called up and they said I got the job. They want to hire me. And I was like, okay, so young people who clearly it was not up to those young people who they were going to get, being run by with an indie older female producer, and then there's these older people who've been in Hollywood forever and worked with Barry Sonnenfeld and tons of huge DPs, and we're like, oh yeah, we're going to take a chance on this kid, this young woman who is in her 30s and who is not even in the union yet. But says she knows what she's doing. And I like what she's saying. And I had a sense of humor and I had a good meeting. And, I thought to myself, well, this is interesting because I'm going to get in the union now. But it's interesting to me. And I think sometimes people have prejudice against us as female cinematographers and sometimes women. And the reason is because they're insecure in themselves. And they're insecure thinking, I would never be able to do it, so why should that person be able to do it? I feel safe with whatever, a nerdy old man or whatever it is, or a young cool guy who's got a flashy reel. But there's a sensitivity, I think, that female cinematographers have that is very particular, which is why I probably still operate a lot of the things I don't DP, because that sensitivity is not there. So I think for me, my goal coming up is to have a female DP that I work with so that I can have that dual sensitivity and have another person, and then we can, same way as I do now. And I really do think the DPs I've chosen have much more estrogen than I do. They're very sensitive men, but still it's not the same. And I think that part is something I'm really looking forward to. I mean, to be fair, not to be a jerk, but I have on the movies where I hired DPs, there were some women I reached out to and they were not available. But, I do think the more I think about it, I'm like, there's a thing that we have. And if I could double that up, it would be great, because I do think it's like you feel it in some of the coverage. You don't always feel it in the other coverage. And I think when people don't, the same things maybe people are scared about in hiring a female cinematographer are probably the same reasons why a female cinematographer might be a great choice, because of the fact that they are probably coming at it from a place of feeling, and there are male DPs I know do that as well, of course, like some of the people I've worked with. But I do think a lot of the female cinematographers I'm friends with, it's like we talk about that, and you do you care so much about story and so much about emotion. And for me, I can only speak for myself, but every shot choice I make and every decision I make is always driven by an emotion that I want to convey, or, some kind of emotional manipulation even for the audience. So,
which is very evident in all of your work, that has come out, and which I would connect back to my earlier question, that I think somehow you have managed to keep a very distinct voice in all your films that I have seen, and I think that's something which also requires a lot of courage to stick to, because it's not easy to always be able to stick to your vision, because of many practical challenges. Maybe you have to get a job, to be able to pay your rent, or, maybe you don't want to get out of the circle of work, so you just take up whatever comes your way. But, to be able to still manage to stick to how you want to say things and the things that you want to say, I think it requires, tremendous courage that you have, Reed, and, you have really, that's the inspiring part. Now I have to get back to this thing that I have been wanting to tell you, ever since I thought of this session, which connects to the question of when you forayed into direction, what were the comments that you heard from people? Because I remember that I made a short film a few years back, and the questions that were thrown at me were, so now are you going to be a cinematographer, or are you going to be a director? And, at that time I was really afraid. I was afraid that, okay, so, have I made a wrong choice or do I have to really choose as to, what I need to do? I never thought like that. And then I was watching Meadowland, and, and I was thinking about you, that maybe I don't need to, why do we need to choose as filmmakers, always? Maybe we want to experiment with different avenues. But what is it that you had heard when you forayed into direction? What were the comments that came your way?
People definitely asked if I was going to ever go back to DPing, and I think with the first movie, I just said, look, I'm just trying this out. I didn't even know if I was going to like it. I think the most important question we have to ask ourselves is, if it's something we love, that's all that matters, and of course the pressure from people around you to decide what it is you are. I think that I never told anyone I wanted to be a director, until after I started directing like a couple things, because I didn't want to call myself a director yet, because I didn't know if I was one, if that makes any sense. So like, totally. I think what I did was I just didn't tell anyone. I kept it a secret. I was sort of afraid, because I was afraid I was going to fail at it. Which is the truth. It's just the truth. So I didn't want to make a big deal out of it. So I didn't tell anyone, unless, the people close to me obviously knew, and they knew that was my plan. And they were just supportive, my crew, my longtime crew. And then when I didn't know if it was going to work if I did the two jobs at once. And I remember day one on Meadowland, with even all the best laid plans, I still didn't really know if it was going to work. And I remembered, I thought to myself, this is going to be really difficult. I may need to call up like Ben, or Ben Cutchins, or Rachel, or I gotta call one of my buddies, but I stuck it out for the first day or so, and then by the end of day one, I was like, we got into a rhythm, and it's a real credit to the cast, to Olivia Wilde, but also to my AD and my camera team and my and my G&E team. Like, they all helped me get into a rhythm. We all did it together, and it's not a one man. Even if you're doing all those jobs, you need that support of an entire team to make it possible. And I think, you don't have to choose. And so I didn't for those first few years. I just didn't really make any bold statements like, I'm only directing now. I knew after I made Meadowland, I really loved it. But after Meadowland, I also, even though my team was pushing me to direct more, my agents and whatnot, the opportunity arose. I got a call from Rodrigo Prieto about coming to DP on the series of Vinyl, the thing that he made for Scorsese. And even though I'd already started directing, I was like, this is a dream job for me as a cinematographer. I can't turn this down. There's so much I can learn from doing this job. So I wasn't done yet. There was no cutoff time. There was no particular cutoff time. And even though my agents sort of they understood, I think, why I wanted to do it, but were sort of like, why don't we focus on directing now? I went off and I spent basically a year working on that show. I mean, it was like 6 months, but it really, at the end of the day, it was a year with prep and all. And, but I did take that time to prepare to direct other things. And, I think, that was a beneficial thing that I did. I expanded my horizons as a cinematographer. I wasn't confident enough yet to just call myself a director. And then I was able to spend a lot of time with Marty in a room listening to him. It was probably the best film school ever. And also with just some great directors that worked on that show and amazing actors. And I think the bonding I did with the actors too, everything was a step towards forming where I would get to next. And I think there always are going to be, I think a big mistake a lot of people make, question I get often is, what do you do when people ask you to choose one or the other? Yeah, I don't think you have to choose. I don't think you want to I wouldn't go around saying, hey, I'm going to DP and direct movies until you've done it a couple times, because people naturally, I think, are competitive and they naturally want to cut other people down. It's just unfortunate but true. And I was just having this conversation the other day with a girl that I'm mentoring who lives in LA. And she also is a cinematographer, director, and she doesn't, she's meeting a lot of adversity because of that. And I told her, I go, I think part of the reason why I made it this far was because I never really said to people that was my plan. I just sort of would just ultimately do it. So it's less about talking about it, I think, and more about just actioning that idea. And I think, if you've been a cinematographer for an amount of time, if you've been a cinematographer or even a documentarian documentarians direct and DP their own stuff all the time, that's like pretty normal. But if you've been that type of DP who's been around for 15 years, 10 years, whatever, you've been working at it, to move into directing is not weird, I think, at that point, because you've had so much experience helping the director realize the story that it wouldn't be odd. And if you wanted to find your way into your own story through looking through the viewfinder, it feels completely natural to me that would be how it goes. Now, however, you do have to be a good multitasker. That being said, women are naturally good multitaskers.
Yeah. I mean, that's where the edge is, I guess. Being the multitasker, and it comes very naturally, like you said. Coming to the series, that you directed, and The Handmaid's Tale, which has resonated on so many levels with so many people, and I mean, the beauty of it is that it doesn't seem too far in the future, and it doesn't seem in the past, and it's like right now. And when I saw it, I just couldn't. I was so absorbed in it, the way and I was reading somewhere that you had this entire the pitch book where you had pretty much laid out everything, the way you see the sound, the way you see the visuals and everything. Can you tell us, how was it translating Margaret Atwood's book onto screen, and how did you think of that?
It was a lot. It was very scary. I mean, luckily what I was handed was, the first thing I read was sort of the script. I had read the book back in college. I hadn't read it in a while. And I remembered it was one of the few books I remember from college, because mostly in college I was trying to run around and shoot people short films. But I do remember reading The Handmaid's Tale. And when I got the script for the pilot, I thought, wow, this is a pilot I would want to shoot. You know, like this is a pilot I would want to direct. I kind of think I know my way into this. I didn't have a very big respect for television at that point. I loved television, but I want to make movies, you know. But for when I read the script, I felt that Margaret, you know, between the script that Bruce and Eileen had written and Margaret's words that were within it, there were so many challenges, but they were very good cinematic challenges that I felt translated very well to me in a way that I was into a medium I was familiar with. It felt like it would just be like a movie, you know. It would be like a slightly shorter than a normal length of a movie. Because at that time I was only looking at the pilot, and I thought I was interviewing for the pilot. So, you know, when I started, you know, as soon as I read the script, I was immediately hounding my agents to get me you know, a chance to pitch on it. And they were like, oh, well, they're out to Ridley Scott right now. So like basically kind of just let's let that play out. You know, that's where it's at. And you're not likely. We just kind of shared this script with you just so you could understand like the cool stuff that you know, Hulu and MGM are doing and all that. They're like, but if you're going to go, you're going to have a meeting with them. You may as well tell them you want to pitch on it. And I'm like, all right. So I had like general meetings with them, and they were asking me, you know, don't you want to, maybe you can direct an episode of this show. Maybe you could direct an episode of this show, meaning like doing episodic. And I was like, you know what script I really love? And they were like, what? And I was like, The Handmaid's Tale. And they were like, that's a good one, but kind of like, you know, patting me on the head, like, okay, little kid. And then I went away and, you know, of course, didn't get the chance to pitch. And then I saw it was announced later that Elizabeth Moss got cast as Offred in the trades. And I said to my agent, do they have a director yet? And they were like, nope, not yet. And I wrote an email to Elizabeth because Lizzie had been a small role in Meadowland, and we have a close friend in common. And I wrote her a quick email just saying congrats on getting that role and how I was just coincidentally had been trying to pitch on it. And, you know, I got a return message that she was on a shoot. She was shooting Top of the Lake 2 at the time. And so I didn't expect to hear back from her, and I didn't. But 2 weeks later, my agents told me, you're pitching on Handmaid's Tale in 4 days. And I was like, what? So I had to scramble and get it together like super fast. So I basically ended up, I went into hyper-focus mode. I have ADD, which is maybe helpful at times. And in this moment, it was all I wanted to do was get this job. So one of the side effects of that is having hyper-focus about one thing. So for 4 days straight, I didn't do anything. I didn't sleep. And I was about to go direct an episode of Halt and Catch Fire and leave my place in Brooklyn. But I spent those last 4 days just in front of my computer looking up all this imagery that made me feel the way the words made me feel and made me emotional. And I had found some music that was Hildur Godman's daughter. She's the cellist now that everybody's using for you know, to compose. She's an amazing composer. I think she just won the Oscar for Joker. But I was listening to some albums that she had made, and this was before I even knew about her in the way of a composer. I just knew she worked with Jóhann Jóhannsson, and I was listening to a song over and over. I kept listening to the same song, these cellos that she did. And I think it's called Erupting Light. And I was sitting there just listening to writing the lookbook, writing down all my thoughts, writing down quotes from Margaret Atwood, writing down how I would do everything. matching it with imagery that I found, and I just kept like listening to that song over and over. And I remember I was like putting it together, and I was like crying while I was doing it, because I think when you feel something and you can see it in your head so much, you're like, this is going to be so powerful. And so I think you have to, like, when you prepare for something like that, you have to feel in your bones there's a reason why you need to do this. And particularly with that show, I felt it like with every inch of my being. I was like, I know what this has to be. Like, I didn't even really know, but I wrote down very detailed how it would be shot, what the flashbacks would look like, what the present day would look like, symmetry, the colors, pretty much everything, how the show turned out in those first. So then when I met with them and I gave them, I took that lookbook and made it into a hardcover book and sent it to the showrunner, Bruce, and I had a great meeting with him and Warren Littlefield, who was the producer, and we weren't even in person. We were just talking over the phone, but I think they felt me. They felt that emotion that I had and that confidence I had about the emotion that the show, the weight of the show, and this is even before the way the world is now, but still relates to the way the world is in other countries. And I just felt like this is important. And they came back and said, do you want to direct the first 3 episodes? And I said, yeah, like, of course. And my agents are like, wait, you got to wait and see what they are. And, you know, the second episode, it's pretty much a woman giving birth the entire episode. Are you sure you're going to be able to make that interesting? And I was like, gotta try, you know, and it's pretty weird and amazing. And I just thought, you know, sometimes you have to go into those situations with where you aren't 100% sure, you know, but you have a feeling that you know that this is going to be special, and that you have feelings about how you're going to do it, and you know those are going to evolve as you work with the actors and as you work with your crew. But you get that feeling in your gut, and I think you just have to go with it and go almost a little bit sometimes on blind faith. I had never directed a pilot before, so I didn't know what I was getting into, but they gave me the opportunity, so I'll always be grateful for that. But I definitely fought for it, you know.
Right. I mean, everything about that show is so incredible, from the acting to the everything, camera, and the way the sets are, and the way the lighting is. I mean, it's amazing that the subject is so dark, you know, but all the images are poetic, you know. I mean, of course, I mean, it's like a dark poetry, you know, if I may say so. And I was also reading somewhere about your collaboration with the DP, Colin Watkinson, and how, you know, you kind of eventually, you know, kind of brought together your styles, because he has a slightly different style, you know, like all glossy, and you do play with darkness quite a bit.
Yeah.
And so how was it coming to that similar page with Colin?
Well, you know, what's great about Colin is, I mean, the reason why I ended up working with Colin was that I had seen the movie The Fall that Tarsem directed, right. And that was like 10 years prior, and I was always obsessed with The Fall. And I look back at The Fall now, and I'm like, it's still incredible, you know, but yeah, Colin is very different than me, was very different than me. I think now we're very similar, but that's what I liked about it. I was like, I need someone who can make things look big and epic and elegant, and then mix it with this gritty, emotional thing that I know I can do. And I also felt that it was going to be very, there was going to be some very composed, you know, sort of graphic frames. And I felt like, you know, Colin would be able to grasp that, and that together we could combine our styles and hopefully create like a hybrid, another type of look that would be something that neither one of us would do necessarily get on our own at that point, but more what came out of our mutual respect for each other's aesthetic. And I think that's what's so great when you get two DPs working together. So that's what's such a joy for me when I get to work with another DP, is I know I'm inspired. As a director, it's your job to inspire your crew. And I know as a DP, I often would struggle because there's things I wanted to do and there's things the director would want, but I always wanted to give them their vision better than they ever imagined it. And sometimes your own aesthetic gets in the way of that. But I think it's hard when it's a director who hasn't DP'd something necessarily, because you don't really know what is their true aesthetic. I mean, you get an idea of it. It just depends on how good of a communicator they are. But with Colin, what was so great was once he was open to this collaboration, he and I, once he realized it really was truly a collaboration, what was so wonderful and I learned about Colin, and the reason why I've worked with him again and again, is he is so earnestly wants to get into his director's head, so earnestly wants to find what is that truth in your head about what the story needs to be. And he comes at it, he does come at it from an emotional place, and he does come at it from a sensitive place. And when I was we were scouting locations, I took a lot of photographs with my Sony A7R, and I would take not practical location photographs, but more like I would frame up shots, you know, that would maybe be shots I would get in the show. And I would always have someone, you know, in this case, it was my assistant, Danny Girdwood, was in all of the pictures, and I would make it very dark and very dramatic. And then I would grade all of those pictures, like color grade them, just whatever, not well, just like on my phone, you know, not, Colin, I posted those just to be like, you know, a little inspiration for the department heads and for, you know, Julie, my production designer, and Anne, who is my costume designer. And Colin really took those early sort of inspirational photos and made them become an inspiration for the look of the show. And, you know, Colin and I worked with Ben Whaley, who was our DIT on Handmaid's Tale in Toronto. And it took us a few days to come up with what was going to be the on-set LUT, which would then inform. Colin and I are very similar in the sense that we like to do as much as possible for the final look on set. And other DPs are different. Like, for example, Sean Bobbitt is, you know, he does light beautifully on set, but he often will not do his final look on set. And he, you know, we have a colorist that we both work with named Tom Poole. And, you know, Sean likes to have a very, very sort of intense sort of, you know, color correction with Tom Poole at the end. Whereas, you know, I may change the entire look of something I shot, the entire color palette. Usually I start out more muted, and then Tom or whoever's ended up, Drew, another person I worked with, they will end up bringing more color back into it. But in any case, Colin really liked that color, that initial color from those photos. And I worried because I told them there's only one rule. I hate magenta. I really hate magenta. And they were like, okay. But where we actually ended up with The Handmaid's Tale after a few days of experimenting with on-set LUTs was it was a very magenta LUT. I'm just going to put it this way. Like the predominant color, the strongest color was magenta. I really wanted the whites to be whiter, but I could tell they all had a magenta tinge to them. And I was like, this is so weird for me. But that's an example of how something I would never do on my own. Through the collaboration with Colin and Ben, we discovered that it gave The Handmaid's Tale a very particular look, unlike that of what we'd seen before. And unlike what I've done before. And I really do want to, you know, I'm a creature of habit. So I really like the lenses I use. So I use a lens once, I want to use them again and again. But I also like to discover a new thing and make each story have its own identity. And so that's what we did on Handmaid's Tale. And then, you know, it was a great, it was tricky, but it was a great collaboration once we figured out what we wanted it to be. But it was it was truly a collaboration. There was really no, it was just like, what do we like? Do we like this? Do we like this? And there was times where we didn't always agree, but we worked well together, and we have a mutual respect. And it really did create it was Colin's, so much of it is Colin, but it was Colin's way of interpreting my dream,
Right. And that in itself is a dream, if your cinematographer can interpret your vision close to how you're actually envisioning it. But I mean, having worked in so many different roles, now do you feel that you can manage any kind of people dynamics? I mean, you've worked as a director, and then you've worked as a DP, and then you worked also on a show where there are multiple DPs. So I mean, you've also, for example, on Vinyl, you were sharing the space with another DP, and so do you feel that now it's a piece of cake for you to manage those dynamics?
Yeah, on Vinyl, that was great. Actually, on Vinyl, I worked with the easiest DP ever, David Franco, who is one of the geniuses, unsung heroes of lighting in the world. Like, David Franco's lighting is insane. That is his forte. And we had a mutual jealousy of each other's stuff. Like, for some reason, he was always jealous of what I shot, and I was always much more jealous of what he shot, I think. He's incredible. But yeah, no, he was such a good person that it was easy to get along with him. It was more about us just being self-deprecating, really, because I think DPs in general, especially in our generation, happen to love other DPs. And that's why people love these conversations, because I think it's exciting. It's always been exciting for me to hear other DPs discuss what they do. And I think we all have a mutual appreciation of each other's eye and craft. But, in any case, to speak towards like dealing with people and sort of situations and being diplomatic, I think, and knowing what to say. One of the things, I think, being a cinematographer actually really is what set me up for that, because you are not just an artistic presence. You are a manager. You are like a coach of a team, like you have to delegate. You can't do it all yourself. You want to make sure your crew is happy. I mean, most DPs, I think, care if their crew is happy. They want to protect them and keep them happy, because that's how they get great stuff. And also, my crew is my friend. And I think that's where I learned all in the beginning. And also figuring out diplomatically how to get what I wanted as the DP, what I thought was best for the movie, took some interesting diplomatic tactics as far as communication with production or communication with the director. Some directors are just like, yes, please do whatever. Other directors are very protective, and they don't want to not be the one with the idea. More often than not, the directors I worked with were really open, and I would make suggestions, and they would just trust me. But I think learning how part of paying attention to different people's personalities and how you get what you need out of each person is sort of the key to directing as well. And very true that there is no one way to direct an actor. Every actor you speak to needs to be triggered in a different way. You need to get through to them the idea in a different way. For some actors, they just need a word or two, one sentence. Some actors like to talk about it for 20 minutes or, days. And others, they like to have you really involved, and it's, everybody's different, and I think it's just being like paying attention to people, who they are. And I found that it did start back when I was DPing, and I don't know if you do this, but when I would interview for a job, I found myself matching the personality of the person I was interviewing with. Like I almost would not match them, but sort of lean into whatever I felt they needed. And I probably didn't get that one DP job with the young director and the writer, because I was having so much fun chit-chatting with them like a person their age, you know, like, and I just can kind of, I feel like I could make people feel comfortable. And I think as a DPs, we are trained to make a lot of people feel comfortable. We know our mission is, our first sort of mission is to make the actor be as comfortable as possible so they can do their best work. And I found that instinct is what has, I think, been one of the major reasons why I get jobs, even as a director, because you have to see into that person what they need and be that thing they need. And then as a DP, that was true. And I think as a director, you have to do that too, so that people, you can communicate better. And I don't think a lot of people, everyone does it. I just think that's what's made it easier for me, is I'm true to myself, but I also, and it's interesting, there's a writer I'm working with right now who's an incredible writer, Oscar-winning writer. And he's often said to me recently, especially, we've had a bunch of meetings where he witnesses me sort of saying what I'm saying or doing my pitch. And he's like, I don't know how you do it. I don't know how you're so patient. And I don't know how you manage to always sort of say what people want to hear, but it is what you want to say. And I think you just have to be, you know, it is a tactic, but I think a lot of people have that capability. It's just it's having a sensitivity, I think, and an awareness.
That is true. So, Reed, I'm not going to hold you up for longer, even though all of us here want to. But I will take this one question, which I think sums it up pretty much. Maybe, I mean, which is, what would be the 3 things you would do? I mean, it doesn't have to be 3 things, but what would you do differently if you were starting out today, when you look back at your long career so far?
Oh boy. I mean, I did take a little detour to LA after I graduated college, where I went to LA because I was already very well established in like a little, very, very indie, non-union scene of filmmaking in New York. And I was working a lot. And I just really had this dream of going to LA and living in sunny California. And so I thought, oh, I'll go do it there. But I didn't know anyone yet. And I wasn't an established DP. I hadn't shot Frozen River. I really was, you know, so at the beginning. And I went there with no connections. And, you know, I ended up, I wouldn't really change any of my path, but I did go there, and I really ended up, you know, basically waitressing. To sort of sum it up, I was a waitress at the Cheesecake Factory for a year. And I feel like I always regret that I lost that year. I went there, I was sort of depressed. I took my film that I had made in film school that I shot on 35 millimeter. I remember it wasn't fully done. I threw it in the dumpster. I was, you know, there was just nothing there for me at that time. And I regret leaving New York, where I had a really strong independent scene, and I left it. But luckily, when I came back, when I was smart enough to come back, and actually it wasn't even my idea, it was my mother and my aunt Leslie's idea, come back, because I had broken my foot, and they were like, you can't go back to LA and waitress anyway, so you may as well stay here. But when I came back, my friends were still there, and I think, you know, I should have stuck with them and stayed and not left, and maybe I would have been a little further along. But I do believe everything you do on your path leads, you know, to, sometimes you do things and they take you off track. But if you didn't do them, it wouldn't have led you to the great place that you are in that moment. And I wouldn't want to interrupt that path. It was a very, very windy one. And I think that's really what's most important to remember is there's no one path, and whatever it is, you just have to enjoy yourself. Right. If you're enjoying yourself while it's happening, and you're not always going to enjoy yourself. You're going to have jobs you hate. Get out of those as quick as you can. Get through it as quick as you can. But life's too short to be working with people you don't like. Life's too short to be miserable. But sometimes you do have to make your way through a tough job. Example, Frozen River. That was a really difficult job. I was pretty miserable on it, with the exception of my crew. It was like the only thing, and the actors kept me going. But I stuck with it, and if I didn't, I wouldn't be talking to you here right now. So it's sort of about going with your gut. My gut told me I had to finish that job, and I did. And I think just knowing that I wasn't in a rush, like I just set like realistic goals for myself, and I enjoyed every moment of it. And I never imagined that I would eventually direct a show that people would see, and or even direct a DP my own movies. I never imagined that those things were going to happen. And it's not bad to imagine those things, but I think because I wasn't thinking that big at the time I started out, I was just enjoying each step of the journey and didn't realize that it had been so many years. And I just loved being on a set and telling stories. And I think if we all feel the same way, and I think if you love what you do, there's no real regrets,
Right. And also, I mean, if I may add, you went on, you kept going, and now, you've reached a place where people, all of us who are here, who look up to, are going to take inspiration from that. So I think sometimes, you need to keep going you may not realize it, but then you end up carrying on with your baby steps, and that leads to a place where so many others can get inspired to take those baby steps. And, and I don't know how much you have read how many comments you've read here, but they are so full of love for you. And, there are so many people whose lives you have ended up touching just by going on. I mean, thank you so much, Reed. This was one of the best conversations that we've had. We've had a lot of guests, all very strong female filmmakers, and they're all on their path. Like you said, everybody's path, it doesn't have to be the same, and it's different, and, you just have to keep on going. And it's just a pleasure to be able to hear from so many, and it's been amazing to hear from you. And I think we're just going to keep on talking. We have a group where all the female cinematographers are there, and it's just going to keep on buzzing now with the messages about everything that you said. And thank you for keep going, and thank you for coming here, taking out the time. And
I'm so happy that you asked me to do this, and it's really an honor for me. And to know also that you guys have formed this collective and what you're doing and everything, it's really inspiring to me as a person who, when I started out, I looked around and I didn't see anyone. I didn't see anyone I didn't see women doing what I wanted to do. I didn't see a lot of them. And there's nothing more inspiring to me than to see you guys and all the women. It's like we're taking over. So I think, we just have to keep going at it. And I never stop learning. And it's just, if that whole excitement of learning a new thing on every time we step on the set, it just doesn't get old. And I'm just excited to see how storytelling is going to change because of you guys because of us, you know?